Welcome to Cannon Beach Library's third annual Writers Read celebration. We are here tonight to celebrate the writers, whether they are beginners, professionals, or those who like to keep their work hidden, but have been brave enough to demonstrate their skills tonight. I am Nancy McCarthy. I'm a volunteer with the library's Northwest Author Series, which sponsors the Writers Read celebration. This is our third year of the celebration. This year's theme was based on the experience that we have shared for nearly a year, the pandemic. But the writers could use that theme any way they wanted to do it, and we only asked that they limit their pieces to 600 words. We received 51 works from 37 writers. It's the most we've ever had, but that's probably because they may not have had much else to do. The pieces that you will hear tonight were selected by a 5-member panel of library volunteers whose experiences have included university teaching, library work, bookstore assistance, and professional writing. The panel didn't know who wrote the pieces. They were selected for their use of language, how well they kept to the theme, and the emotions they evoked. You will hear poems, essays, stories, and even a haiku and a limerick, which was the first we've ever had. If you would like to ask a question or express an opinion on Facebook, please do so. We will try to ask as many of your questions as we can within this hour. So let's get started. Our first writer will be Laura Bailey. Laura lives in Manzanita, and she will read her story, Not the Skin of a Well Man. Laura writes fiction and creative nonfiction. Her work has appeared in Rain Magazine, the North Coast Squid, and the Georgetown Journal of International Affairs. Laura believes that the Oregon coast is a magical place for writers, and she is at work on a novel that grew out of a short story she wrote during a writing workshop hosted by the Hoffman Center in Manzanita. Please help me welcome Laura Bailey, who will read her story, Not the Skin of a Well Man. Laura, take it away.
Thank you, Nancy. Not the Skin of a Well Man. He had tried so hard to make it impossible for me to find him. But as his body weakened and his dependence on others grew, as the morphine took center stage, he lost control. Such a simple act, giving his sister-in-law his phone password so she could answer for him, hold it up so he could speak if he wanted to, rest it gently on his shoulder so he could hear. Such a simple thing. But once Anne had the phone, she answered it too. And after our first conversation, it all began to unravel. His avoidance and pride, a tautly wound ball of string, undone by my persistence. I extracted the details I needed from Anne, bought plane and bus tickets, got directions to the house. The rumbling of the old bus was an opiate, easing the pain of my trip, lulling me into memories of adventure, where the unexpected was a gift. Maybe there were gifts hiding in this wretched mess of a moment too, like the gift of not being admitted to the hospital unless you were sick with the virus, the gift of visitors being allowed, although he wasn't likely to see it that way. The bus dropped me at the corner, and I found the address, climbed the stairs. Anne had left the door unlocked for me as promised, and I left my bag on the threshold and edged the door shut. His skin was not the skin of a well man. Absurd to say that about someone who is so clearly sliding toward death. And the sliding part was the part that was the most frightening to me, not the death part. He never slid toward or away from anything. He would stand up, argue, fight, reject, run towards, confront, lecture, insist, embrace, but never slide. The physics of the path of least resistance was a foreign language, a treachery. He would go out as a Viking, tall, proud, on fire. Except he would not. He would go out supine in a bed from which he could not free himself, trapped in a body that had betrayed him. His skin was not the skin of a man who would recover. Death was pulling it taut across bones made prominent as the disease ate his flesh, tangling it into a parody of insultingly premature wrinkles. I could see the blue-black marbling of veins, the minute vibrations of his eyelids. I imagined he was dreaming. I wanted him to be dreaming. I wanted him muscling his sailboat through a threatening storm, rambling the rocky bluffs for a late summer picnic, high with laughter as we romped through the waves, debating the volume of beer needed for a solstice crayfish supper, or how we would fillet the fish still dancing in the bottom of the boat. Watching him lying there, trapped and vanquished, my throat clogged up and I felt a cowardly pull to flee. His voice, when it came, was less substantial than a whisper. You shouldn't be here. His eyes eased open, smoke gray, and our decades of struggle and affection and tenderness were all there in that fierce, insistent gaze. My whole body settled, my fear dropping away, and those tears finally came. Steady, unrelentingly gentle, I crawled up onto the high hospital bed, pressing myself as close as I could without displacing tubes or lines. I snugged my face into the crook of his neck, pressed my lips against his feverish skin. I felt him relax even as he insisted again, you shouldn't be here. It wouldn't be long now.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that. I have a question for you. Is this based on a true experience, or is this something that just came to you?
It's linked to a true experience. So it was inspired by a true experience, yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was very, very good. The next writer we have is Nat Finn from Garibaldi, and he will do a story on Hey On, Old, Old Man. Nat, who is known publicly as Nathan Finn Findling, is a fifth-generation graduate of Valparaiso High School in Valparaiso, Indiana. Say that 3 times. His grandfather, Donald Dean Findling, is the old, old man, and he was a third-generation graduate from that same high school. Nat holds bachelor's degrees in philosophy and business and has worked in marketing and assisting startup businesses. He says there was a fair amount of copywriting, blogging, and social media in his career to sustain him, but not to fulfill him. He is a planning commissioner in Garibaldi, and his wife, Katie, is a city councilor for the city of Garibaldi. She comes from a family of Tillamook County pioneers. Katie is holding Nat's feet to the fire to follow his dreams, even as they await a miracle, or should I say 2 miracles, in fact, due to arrive in September, thanks in no part to the OHSU fertility specialists. And this is an announcement they wanted to make over the air. So congratulations, Nat. Nat occasionally works on his drafts of writing, but he is likely waiting to finish them until he can properly regret all the time he wasted before their family grew. You can read about his struggle on his blog, How to Write and Publish Books of Blues, hopefully, at natfinn.com. Let's hear Nat read his story, Hey On, Old, Old Man.
Thank you. Hey on, old man. The old man used to tell me that the good Lord sent southern winds so Chicago could see Valpo had blue skies too. The good Lord delivered in spades that day, providing an incandescent azure canvas and cottony clouds to accompany the wafting southerly breeze. With the hilltop view of the Chapel of the Resurrection backdropped by our hometown, the old man had everything he ever wanted, give or take a frosty, now that his lady, Grandma Betty, would be by his side again. Our family was there that day. His youngest daughter, my Aunt Judy, his daughter-in-law, my mama, his only granddaughter, my sister, and his oldest daughter's best friend, Linda. No, absolutely. The rest of us were there too. We were the ones who looked like the intro to the Brady Bunch on my sister's phone because in July 2020, there was only one way we could converge on that hillside in Valparaiso, Indiana, from parts all over. Who's running the phone? Asked my dad's cousin, Easy, who has the best raspy Chicago accent that I can't emulate. I think that's my BFF Linda, said my Aunt Jane. Did you talk to them about aiming? Asked Katie, my wife. I noted we only saw the Reverend's podium yesterday, I said. Should we be quiet? Asked my Aunt Jane. I hope they can hear us in case we have problems, said EC. The bugle took our breath away. After its hard, aching climb up the hill, the first 7 shots fired. After its harder, lamenting retreat down, the second 7 shots fired. Its third line hit that alto 10 hut note in the middle to make sure we came to attention. After its last line exhaled, the last 7 shots fired. It's that numbing silence after the last note faded away that stuck with me now because now the old man's gone. He gone. Did they fold the flag? Asked EC. Probably, I said. I couldn't see it, said Jane. None of us could, said EC. The tears took over as the camera panned left, where appeared the triangular blue and white stars of Old Glory, offset left and laid over the old man's gunmetal and chrome coffin. I can't see and can barely hear the Reverend, said Aunt Jane. Same, said EC. It should be on the recording, I said. I don't know if I can watch it again, said Aunt Jane. Me too, we said. I studied the tear-stained faces of my family Facebook group and discovered to my bittersweet delight that many of our long-missed family members had logged in sometime along the way. Finger pointing, smiles, waves, and even more tears flurried about as we all found each other. When our stream gave a glimpse of whom we assumed was the Reverend behind the mask, we heard an amen. Well, that was loud enough, said Aunt Jane. Then our family at the consecration stood up. We could see my sister kiss the flag and my mama place more flowers, and we could see them walking back to the sedans. Wait, I said. Aren't we going to see them place the coffin in the ground? I want to see them put the coffin in the ground. I asked again and again and again, repeatedly, loudly, angrily towards desperately until they got in the car, and my Aunt Judy replied, they do that later. That's not what they did for Grandma Betty. I tried not to shout. I don't know what to tell you, said Aunt Judy. That's not what they told us. Things change. Do they ever? Now, where to find a Wendy's Frosty on the coast?
I think that kind of tells about what we're all doing nowadays with Zoom and cell phone and so forth, just trying to experience something when we can't be there. So good job, Matt. I wanted to ask you, what types of drafts are you putting off working on?
I'm coming up with every excuse not to write. I've got 3.5 novels, a couple of them full drafts, a couple of them hacked up to get to the rest so I could turn it into a 5-part set. And doing the last book first because that's just the funnest way to do it. To do it just as hard as possible. And I keep championing everyone else's causes because I didn't plan on being a planning commissioner. I didn't mean to help our friends rebuild a bistro. And then the moment I think my wife's going to get mad, she just champions anything else I do. It's counterintuitive. I think if there's this wall I keep waiting for her to push back on, and she doesn't. And it's beautiful. Not, and like I said, it's not her, it's on me. So it's like I keep looking for excuses, and the universe keeps going, nope, it's on you.
Well, you'll find that there'll be all kinds of things throughout life that you put off until just the right moment. So thank you very much for your work. All right, our next story is an essay from Lisa Mayfield. Lisa's from Salem, and her essay is on toilet paper. Lisa lives and works as a mediator in Salem. She writes sometimes, as she has since high school, and every few decades has published somewhere. She sold a piece in the 1980s to Just Out in Portland, and she enjoyed the publication of a few essays in Alternatives magazine in the early 2000s. So now she feels it's about time to have her work recognized again, as it is tonight. Let's hear from Lisa Mayfield on toilet paper. Not on toilet paper, but an essay on toilet paper.
Thank you, Nancy. On toilet paper. Early in the COVID-19 pandemic, as some people are moved to hoard toilet paper, shortages cause panic and make national news. But for me, toilet tissue is a non-issue. A fortuitous upside of the death of my difficult but beloved best friend and former partner, Jerry, is that I ended up with one of his unopened 48-roll packs of toilet paper. A cube roughly 3 feet square, the package poses a storage puzzle, but also regularly summons the poignant mystery of Jerry. Jerry's 2-bedroom rental house was a horror to behold. You know what it was like if you've ever read a story about hoarding or seen a photo of the home of someone who hoards. Jerry's impulse to acquire things was fierce and unrelenting, and in direct competition with his own discomfort at living among all the things, in a constant state of overwhelm. He was stuck between the proverbial rock and hard place, on the ragged edge, between opposing forces. When I first met Jerry 15 years ago and saw his apartment, what I said was, "Yikes," which made him laugh. Forever after, he referred to all his stuff as his yikes. At the time, it reminded me of the basement of a funky and enchanting old hardware store I loved in Portland. It held too much of everything, while everywhere there were beautiful and interesting things. And it lacked discernible organization, except one hoped in the mind of its keeper. If you poked around Jerry's things, you would come across lovely ones amid stacks of mundane household items. Pottery, small sculptures, drawings, paintings, lamps, cameras, pocket knives, art supplies, vases, glassware, silver. There was the ugly too, desiccated houseplants and overflowing trash cans, litter box, and sink of dirty dishes. But it seemed to contain everything, suggesting to me all the light and shadow of life and the universe. Like the basement of Hippo Hardware, it was the unconscious made magnificently tangible. It was amazing, and Jerry, a fascinating creature. I thought many times that Jerry's things could come in handy when civilization collapsed. A fetching Hawaiian shirt or a dozen made of delectable fabric might be worth something in trade. The problem was that Jerry actually didn't know where anything was, even though he knew he owned one or even many. When we lived together, and it happened that something was needed but couldn't be found, I became fond of remarking that when you can't find a thing, it's a whole lot like not owning one at all. My beloved Jerry was alcoholic and a survivor of early childhood abuse and of the Vietnam War. Having an alcoholic partner or best friend means you often can't find them when you need them, even if they're right there. And here it is, the world on the verge of collapse and Jerry dead for months, his dreadful stockpile at the end, having lost every bit of its magic after so many years, nothing but a nightmare to clear out like Hercules' stable. Even so, all around me in my place are things of beauty, here only because Jerry was here. And I am sustained in the pandemic lockdown in part because of Jerry's yikes. Rice, beans, spaghetti sauce, sardines, and of course, a now enviable and comforting quantity of toilet paper.
And you might have been the only one at the beginning anyway of this pandemic that had an unending amount of toilet paper. Was Jerry a sculptor as well?
He was. He was a photographer and a graphic artist and a stone sculptor.
I saw a picture with the Arts Watch Oregon publication, the story that Lori Tobias did on Writer's Read. And the photo that accompanied it was a picture of a stone carving, I guess, that Jerry had done. It was beautiful.
Right. Yeah, he was a talented guy.
Well, congratulations on your story. And I hope that you have gotten many more memories of him besides the toilet paper.
Oh, absolutely. He was more than all that. Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right, we will hear from Jeannie McLaughlin now. Jeannie wrote a haiku, Autumn Hope, and a limerick, Ocean's Remedy. Jeannie says that her past 30 years teaching Spanish, English as a second language, and American history in California, Texas, and Oregon have flown by because she was having so much fun. Growing up in Weatherford, Texas, a small town west of Fort Worth, Jeannie learned the value of a tight-knit community. In 1975, Jeannie found her real niche in Cannon Beach. She and her ex-husband founded Geppetto's Toy Shop, and after her teaching career, Jeannie hosted at Moe's restaurant for 20 years. She has a son who lives in Vancouver, Washington with their 2 children, and she also has 2 stepsons in the Portland area. Jeannie is involved with the Partners of the Americas, an adult homestay volunteer program between Oregon and Costa Rica. Jeannie will read now her haiku, Autumn Hope, and her limerick, Ocean's Remedy. Jeannie, it's yours.
Okay, this is the haiku, Autumn Hope. Life's vigor within, soft golden leaves underfoot, pandemic relieved. And here's the limerick, Ocean's Remedy. Look how the ocean waves curl. See how they spray and unfurl. With COVID-19 beholding this scene, the ocean refreshes this girl. That's it.
I like them. They're short and sweet.
They're short.
What made you think of submitting a haiku and a limerick?
Oh, I think it's just, they adapt to nature quite well. And I've read, I've written a few limericks just for family members, birthdays, And then haiku, I've always been interested in Japanese culture, and they're really big into haiku. I think that's where they founded it. So I just thought, I'll try, Took me a couple days or so to write it, but
Very nice
it was
job.
fun.
Very nice job. Thank you,
Thank
Jeannie.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank
gonna
you
go
very
on now.
much.
We're going to go on now to Robert Mushin, and everybody make sure they're muted. Robert is from Cannon Beach, as is Jeannie, and his poem is "I Hope We Can Hug Again." Robert is a retired eye surgeon who has had the hobby of writing his entire life. He especially enjoys poetry, and his book Mango Lessons won a National Book Award. He has been featured in a Seattle writers event called Writers in Performance and has won many awards in local writing contests. He lives with his wife Janae and their dog Thane in Cannon Beach, where he has spent the past 20 years. So Robert, let's hear your poem, I Hope We Can Hug Again. We'll go to Russell Myers while Robert tries to work on his microphone there. Russell is from Vancouver, and he will be talking about a poem, Remembering Walter Gray. Russell is a corporate secretary from Vancouver, Washington, who published his first novel, Swimming with the Current, at the end of 2019. In 2020, he published a short story about a cruise ship under quarantine off the coast of Venice, Italy. He included many of his friends as characters just for the fun of it. The story prompted a friend of his to tell him about the Writers' Read celebration this year at the Cannon Beach Library. Russell and his family had visited the library before and loved it. So he decided to write a poem about a person everybody could recognize, but is too often forgotten. Russell says about his poem, "We're all affected by the pandemic, but our friends and relatives over 80 years old are affected the most. Some of them are still in lockdown mode, waiting for the vaccine or things to get better. Some aren't even able to see their grandkids or great-grandkids like they used to. Whatever their politics or beliefs, we still care about them and remember them, and our hearts go out to all the frontline workers who see them when they're sick or worse." That's what gave me the idea for the last part of the poem. Let's welcome Russell Myers for his poem, Remembering Walter Gray. Russell?
Can you see me now? Thanks, Nancy, and thanks to the panel for selecting my poem, Remembering Walter Gray. Walter Gray was 84. He walked 10,000 steps per day, from Haystack Rock to Silver Point, 5,000 steps each way. He strolled along the sandy shore, a man without a care. He rolled his blue jeans up his legs. His feet were always bare. COVID struck, but he'd laughed it off. He said it was like the flu. For 3 straight weeks, he had a cough, and he had trouble breathing too. He'd fought in a war, and he'd seen his share of people in distress. The virus news was fake, he said. He blamed it on the press. He wore no mask upon his face, and he laughed at those who would. If Oregon ever got too strict, he'd leave the state for good. Tall and strong, the rugged man, with callus on his feet, had lived in town his entire life, just west of Hemlock Street. I saw him there, right in his home. It was me who got the call, and the mask I used to help him breathe didn't do anything at all. The virus took the rugged man. There's not much else to say. So I took some time and I wrote this rhyme to remember Walter Gray.
Thank you, Russell. Is that about a real person that you knew, or is it just a combination of people and things that you thought about?
It's a combination. When my friend Stacy Ann told me about the Writers' Read, I went to the website, cannonbeachlibrary.org, and I saw that the theme was pandemic, and I didn't know that beforehand, and I saw it was pandemic, and immediately I thought about a character, Walter Gray, and his entire life flashed before my eyes. So I decided to introduce him in the poem, tell a brief story about him, and it doesn't matter what we think, but we'll miss him and we remember him, and that's why I wrote the poem.
So you're kind of speaking for every man, huh?
Well, we know Walter Gray, whether we know him or not. We recognize the person. I think.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
think Bob Mushin is ready. Is that right?
Let me in. Yeah. Are you okay now? Am I okay?
You are fine. You're not echoing at all. So I will turn it over to you, Bob.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry about that interruption. Inspiration for this poem came from my observation that we are absolutely not touching each other these days. And that's a trend that I want to see reversed, obviously. Anyhow, here's my poem, and I hope you like it. I hope we can hug again. I hope we can hug again. Of all forms of connectedness, I miss hugs the most. It would be a shame if the year robbed us of the ability to touch each other this way. It doesn't even have to last long. In fact, just to feel your arms around me will make a huge difference. Keep the masks if you must, but it's going to be pretty hard to hug from 6 feet away. In a world of fist bumps, elbows, no handshakes, we grow apart. And not just figuratively. We lose every chance, every opportunity to touch with meaning. Take away my food and water. Lock me in solitary confinement. A hug a day will sustain me. Just don't take away my ability, or worse, my desire to hug. I miss you so badly, how I long for an embrace. Please let me know when we can hug again.
Thank you, Robert. I guess we don't realize how important hugging is until we can't do it anymore.
Yeah, that's right.
Do
I
you,
think we'll get back to it. Yeah.
I think you're right. Eventually we will. Do you concentrate on poetry only, or do you do other kinds of writing?
But poetry, I do writing of all kinds, but poetry has been my most successful medium. And, I have written probably 2,000 poems in the last 65 years, and they're all about the same thing, about looking at a common situation through uncommon perspective. So.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I think those thoughts are something that we have probably all thought about during this past year. So thank you very much. The next person to read is Jennifer Nightingale. Jennifer has the distinction of having read all 3 years of our Writers Read. We do select these pieces blind, but she always comes right up there. So this year she's going to read a poem and an essay. Her poem will be The Collective Voice, and her essay will be Resentment at the End of the Road. Jennifer's earliest memories are reading, reciting, and writing poetry. As a poet, her greatest honor was to have her poem, Where the Heart Once Stood, translated into the Welsh language by the esteemed poet Aled Lewis Evans and read in both languages throughout the UK. Jennifer debuted her first novel, Alberta and the Spark, in May of 2019. Jennifer has also had a 30-year career in the healthcare administration. She works remotely from Astoria for Salem hospitals and clinics. When the workday is done, she joins her husband Holt and their spotted dog Mickey down at the river beach in Fort Stevens to draw inspiration from the tidal rivers and estuaries. In the quiet hours in between, she devotes her time to writing poems and stories inspired by the North Coast. Help me welcome Jennifer Nightingale, who will read her poem, The Collective Voice, and her essay, Resentment at the End of the Road. And be sure and unmute yourself, Jennifer.
There we go. Thank you very much, Nancy. I really appreciate it. And it's quite an honor to be involved in the Writers' Read for 3 years. So my first piece is the essay, and it's a little bit of grousing. So I'm sure that there are some people that might have felt this way from time to time. Resentment at the end of the road. I pulled over at a viewpoint off Highway 101. It looked over the vast Pacific Ocean, and I marveled at the wind-beaten shore pines and their tenacity to survive. And I felt so grateful that this vista was only a few miles from my home. A chill wind blew in my face, carrying the scent of the crashing ocean far below, and I watched the gulls play on the updrafts and invisible currents. There was only one other vehicle at this viewpoint, and it was a camper truck. And I noticed the out-of-state license plate. The vehicle had traveled all the way from Wisconsin. They drove over 2,000 miles through multiple states, and I stared at the license plate. I looked in the cab. No one was in it. No one else was out walking around the viewpoint. Perhaps the people were taking a nap in the back. I walked around the vehicle. It had traveled through Wisconsin, Minnesota, South Dakota. It had entered Wyoming, passed through Montana. Its occupants followed signs to Pasco, Washington, and crossed the Columbia River. They took Highway 26 through the coastal range until they ran out of road at the viewpoint. I knew nothing of the occupants of this camper van except that they came from a state thousands of miles from Oregon. Resentment boiled up from within me. I read the advice from the Centers for Disease Control, and it said, travel can increase your chance of spreading and getting COVID-19. Postponing travel and staying home is the best way to protect yourself and others from COVID-19. So, people from Wisconsin, why are you here? Didn't you listen to the warnings from the CDC? I did not know if these people were young or old or if they had a family here at the coast. My blood boiled from resentment simply because they had come from Wisconsin. They should not be here. They were the fleas on the rats from the bubonic plague. They were Typhoid Mary. I felt something akin to hatred for people that I had never even seen. I stared at their plates with its red letters and tagline that read, America's Dairyland. This metal plate sparked a threat. You don't belong here, I said out loud. Go back to your Dairyland. My voice was harsh and judgmental, and I did not like my voice. I'm sure they couldn't hear me over the wind, but I heard me. And as I traveled down the road, I noticed so many people from out of state. Did they just drive until they ran out of road? I took a casual inventory. It seemed that there were more cars from other states than from Oregon. I pulled off at the river beach. I saw a dusty minivan from Utah, and I used my pointer finger and wrote in the dust at the back of their windscreen, I wrote, go home. I knew nothing about these people except that their license plates were issued in Utah. It alone made them an unwelcome threat. For years, I prided myself in being welcoming, accepting, and curious. And now my blood boils at the sight of these out-of-staters. I do not like being resentful. It's not who I am or who I want to be. Yet each of the state vehicles I see on the road sparks anger, and I want to scream at them all. Go back to where you came from. Go back to your home. I must own that I found a new reason to hate, and that makes me feel ashamed. Okay, the poem called The Collective Voice has a completely different feel to it. And this poem is more of a lament for all those wonderful gatherings where we listen to each other's stories and poetry down at Pier 11. at the Winecraft, or sang in the Astoria column, or when I used to be in the Seattle Welsh Choir and we go up to Canada and sing. And so, at that time, no one ever thought that singing out loud could be spreading a disease. You just like to sing or listen to stories. So here's the collective voice. I used to sing in a choir in the language of my ancestors, our collective voices blending, then detaching to welcome in a descant, weaving, spinning, and spilling over. The choir traveled to the north side of the Canadian border, and we all met up at the Cambrian Hall, sang around a grand piano in the makeshift pub in the basement, told stories and sang old songs that we only half remembered. Drew a deep breath and belted out, counting the goats. We named the many colors that a goat could be. We counted the white, red, black, and khaki ones. And we sang faster and faster until we tumbled into one another. Our breath smelled of weak beer and leek soup. It was such great fun. And the piano players stopped the merriment with a discordant thump, and we laughed and stumbled back to a waiting table. In the morning, we gathered upstairs and sang the well-worn favorite, Sun Streamed Through the Tinted Glass, and we dusted off our bilingual hymn books. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. Give me a heart made happy, clean and honest to unfold. We stood shoulder to shoulder, the heat of our bodies melting the space between us. The vapors of our collective voice were invisible and benign. And now the Canadian border is open only to the essential, and no one gathers for song, as the very breath from our lungs may be filled with contagion, and the Cambrian Hall sits empty and damp under a dark Vancouver sky. We used to meet on Pier 11 to listen to the local poets. A glass of golden wine sat on the table. Big ships sailed up the Columbia River behind our backs. And while we listened to stories of children of the night and chill Canadian winters, grief and laughter spilled out in equal measure. No one dreamed that our breath could bring us sickness and death. Our voices were there for telling stories and sharing songs. We used to sing in the Astoria column, squeezed behind the iron stairs. At Christmas time, we sang generous strains of Gloria in Excelsis Deo, and our collective breath traveled around the interior space, bouncing and echoing all the way to heaven. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight, echoed back at us, baptizing us with the comfort and traditions of the season. Christmas lights hung from the column like guy wires, radiating delicate yellow lights of yellow, red, green, and blue. Year after year, we filled this landmark with song, and visitors would open the door slowly and reverently and climb the 164 stairs to a star-filled sky. We harked the herald angels and sang of the three kings, and the star of wonder, star of light, and the star with royal beauty bright. And now the column is locked, with no promise of reopening. Sea lions bark from the river below. Deer wander silently among the fir-fringed hills. 1,000 far-off lights remind us that we yearn again to be part of a collective voice, with descants and moving part, full faces, and warm hugs. We long to feel the embrace of our community and let the high notes linger.
Thank you, Jennifer. You know, it seems to me that both of those pieces are about, in a sense, about isolation, about wanting to be with other people and not being able to be with your poem, and about almost jealousy that other people are taking the chance to be with other people that they shouldn't be with right now. And yet, you know, you're sitting there alone yourself, wondering why these people are invading your territory. So
Very true.
I think that's very interesting way of putting those thoughts together. You have often joined other writers on an open mic up there in Astoria. And I'm wondering how you're feeling now that you haven't been able to do that. Are you finding other outlets to share your work?
You know, I hate to say it, but it's just not the same. It was such a recharging experience and a magical little place. There you are, right out in the Columbia River, and you see some of the same people like Bob Pyle, who's always encouraging other people, and Florence, and Rebecca Kraft, and all these wonderful souls. And I loved listening every bit as much, but sometimes we would get together and sing. And it was just sort of unplanned and impulsive, but it created such a lovely community. And the thought that we can't gather in person anymore has left like a big hole inside me. So I guess I miss that a lot, Nancy.
Have you found other ways to share?
I try. I've sent pieces into the Rain magazine, and then I share things. I write things for friends and family, and I just it's almost like you just have to scratch that itch, because there's so many stories that need to be told, and so it's not quite the same as pre-pandemic, but in some ways you're almost more compelled to write than ever before.
I understand what you mean. Well, let's go on to the next writer, and that is Emily Ransdell. She's splits her time between Portland and Manzanita, and she has submitted a poem, Day Trip Through the Pandemic, and then another poem, Elegy Interrupted. Emily is a part-time resident of Manzanita, where she volunteers and teaches at the Hoffman Center for the Arts. Emily holds an MFA in poetry from Pacific University, and she regularly publishes in literary journals. So let's hear from Emily Ransdell, who will read us her two poems, Day Trip Through the Pandemic and Elegy Interrupted.
Great, thank you. Day trip through the pandemic. 6 months in, and we're driving just to be driving, hoping a change of scenery will do us good. I am thinking of my mother, smiling from a yellowed snapshot, ankles swollen, her belly barely covered by the tent of her sleeveless smock. And I would arrive into that summer of closed beaches and shuttered theaters, churches that by law had locked their doors, summer of child-sized crutches and miniature wheelchairs, DDT trucks trolling the street. Everyone heard the horrors, how they made you lay flat in a monstrous machine that breathed. Husband, where are we headed? Vistas of ragged junipers and abandoned cattle paths stretched ahead of us, miles of hardscrabble history etched on the hills. I cleaned the dashboard with another Clorox wipe. Everything felt possible. We drank wine and talked floor plans after dinner, scoured catalogs from White Flower Farm. My mother has been dead a decade now. How did she bear it? The future about to barrel forth from her body, vaccine or not. My next poem is called Elegy Interrupted. I had a very good friend died at the beginning of the pandemic. I have tried hard to do what's right, following the arrows down the groceries one-way aisles, staying 6 feet away from anything that breathes. I've made masks from bandanas, wear mascara to look bright-eyed on Zoom. How are you doing? us, everyone. Sometimes I forget you're dead. To grieve for anyone is to grieve for everyone. How many thousands now? To kill time in lockdown, I scroll through photos, Christmas after Christmas, of us looking older, summer after summer in more sensible hats. Of course, there'll be no service despite what you'd planned. This is the way we grieve now, solitary and without ceremony, not even a thrift shop open to take your clothes. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. I think, again, everybody has had some experience very similar. Never can be the same experience, that's for sure. Where did you get your inspiration for the first poem that you wrote, the day trip through the pandemic?
Where did I get my inspiration? It took a long time to write that poem. It took we actually did do a little day trip. And at first I was writing a bitchy poem about why people weren't wearing masks over there in Central Oregon. And I just kept going back to, what is it really about? What is it really about? And it was about fear, and that fear isn't universal. I don't know how to answer that question, really. I just kept going at it. And all of a sudden I remembered that, oh, I was born the same year that that Jonas Salk produced the polio vaccine. And so I looked it up and read on Wikipedia, and sure enough, my mother was pregnant with me before it came out. And I just thought, whoa. So.
Yeah, as I said earlier, we asked people to follow the theme of pandemic, but they could use it in any way they wanted. And when I read your poem the first time, I thought, oh, she's talking about the polio pandemic. Right. And I thought that was very interesting, the way you tied things together like that. I thought that was a very, very well done. Thanks. And speaking of fear, we're going on to our next writer, Elle Schwartz. Elle Schwartz wrote a story about being scared. Nearly 2 years ago, Elle Schwartz moved their whole life from Seattle, Washington to a particular house in Wheeler, Oregon, because it has room to house itinerant artists and host gatherings of artists. This is where you pause for laughter, because that obviously hasn't occurred yet. But Elle Schwartz has no regrets. She says, "We're quarantined in the most beautiful place on earth. And post-COVID, we will continue on our path to build a community of artists." Let's hear from Elle Schwartz, who wrote the story, Scared.
Hello. Thank you for including me. Scared. Everyone on this bus is scared. The driver is especially scared. We look away from because we are scared of riding on a bus with a scared driver. The freak who usually sits by the back door where his crotch will be visible is too scared to masturbate. The pretty young web producers who usually turn away in disgust when they notice the freak staring at them while he masturbates are not even on the bus this morning because they are too scared. The pickpocket is scared to go to work because it's the pickpocket's job to get close, and close is where someone could sneeze or cough, and that could be calamity. And someone's pocket backpack is where dirty, snotty tissues collect, and after touching them, the pickpocket will forget and touch their face, and then after even touching one finger to their face, even just a fingernail touching an eyebrow, the pickpocket will definitely be doomed to premature, agonizing death. And for what? A few grimy dollars. The old people who snuck out of nursing home quarantine are scared to put their possibly already infected and definitely vulnerable geezer lips on the round cheeks of their baby grandkids. The round-cheeked babies are scared the grands will find out how naive they are to enjoy this respite from fond geezer lip assault. Too scared to leave home. You huddle on the sofa with the TV on, which you ignore while you watch shadows move through the room, which is scary because the shadows move in a way you do not recognize because you are never home this time of day. The TV says, be scared. The TV says, don't panic. The TV says, do this. The TV says, do that. The TV says, only fill in the blank can save you. Then the candidate says not to be scared and it's not real and he will save you. You do not know who to believe, but you are now scared this candidate will personally come to your house and literally kill you. Parents are scared of their children. Children love to be dirty, especially their hands, and children love to touch each other, especially roughly, especially on their faces. And children regard spit as a legitimate medium of exchange, which makes children perfect to carry and transmit any scary pestilence without seeming sick. Scared adults avoid their children. Children are free to roam the streets in noisy, dirty, smelly gangs who gleefully threaten adults. The children wipe their runny noses and extend their dirty, sticky, snotty hands to any adult who acts as if they intend to intervene. And the threat is innocent and real and perfectly effective. Children rule. As for me, I have always been scared. I am more scared now. I go to sleep and dream worried dreams. I wake up anxious and alone. I try to calm myself with coffee. It doesn't work. My anxiety rides the slanting rain. The wind frightens me and I try to tame it, which doesn't work either. I remain alone. I let mail collect in my post office box. I keep watch. I run inside when I see anyone walking their dog turn onto my street. I argue with no one, nor do I laugh. For all I know, my neighbors might be dead, sealed behind their doors. I am too scared to check which such kindness might turn out to be the perpetrator of my demise. I hunker down with no. No, I am not okay. I am scared. We are scared. This is how we contrive to stay alive.
So tell me, are you scared?
Yes, I'm still scared. I mean, I wrote that towards the beginning of the pandemic, but yeah, every time I go to the beach and there's all these swarms of people unmasked, I'm scared.
Well, now that you've been in lockdown for nearly a year and you bought your house in Wheeler to be able to share with other artists, how are you doing what are you doing about that? Are you still able to share with other artists even if you can't invite them in?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't actually done much of this, but I discovered that a lot of open mics around the country have gone to Zoom. So I discovered that I could if I wanted to, I could travel around the country and visit open mics all over the country, theoretically. So there's that.
Yeah, that's something that I have found as well. I know the theater here in Cannon Beach has put on some Zoom things, and we've gathered people from Boston and Utah and Tennessee and various places. Knew that the Coaster Theater existed, and now they're participating in some of the things that we're doing. So in a way, it's opened it up.
Yeah, it's funny blessings that come from awful things.
Right. Well, our last writer is Alana Velan, and she's from Wheeler. She has a poem called Pandemic Feast. Alana comes from the Big Island in Hawaii and has found home here, touching her toes on this side of the Pacific Ocean. She lives with her husband, her 2-year-old daughter, and her cat in Wheeler. And she says, because of that, please pardon the inevitable background noise. So Alana, it's yours.
Hi, Nancy. Thank you so much for having me. I wrote this poem around April of last year when everyone was in the infamous baking part of the pandemic. So, pandemic feast. This virus has me sweating, walking uphill, approved exercise to shed the proofing dough appearing on my sides. This virus has me baking, separate gender, rolls and cakes, mostly muffins, top my list, little pretty cakes. This virus has me boiling, cupboard roots and spice. I let my finger linger longer when testing scalded water. This virus has me stirring up closeted storms, deep in the bowls of flour and fear. This virus has me cutting off relations on salvation. Frozen fat crumbles right. The crust will be perfect, and we will be fine. We will be fine. Thanks.
Sounds like you're trying to convince yourself.
A little bit, yeah.
So you came from Hawaii, from the Big Island in Hawaii, and you had inspiration there, I imagine. Where do you get your inspiration now that you're here on the coast?
I think inspiration is all around me. Definitely being a new first-time mother has opened my eyes to a whole new set of feelings I didn't know I had. And I write because it has to get out of me. There's no other way. It just needs to come out. And I'm finding now maybe that people want to hear it. So.
Well, continue to keep writing because we enjoy it.
Thank you.
That is about the end of our writers read, and I'm wondering if we have any messages or any questions from Facebook. And
Nancy,
I think we may not. Is that right, Jen? Jen is our library manager and trying to.
I don't see questions on Facebook, Nancy, unless anybody wants to type anything in right now.
All right, type fast. All right, this is being recorded, so it will be broadcast on Facebook after the presentation. So people might be making comments. So I may be sending all of you little emails if anybody has any particular questions for specific writers. But I want to thank you all for joining us today. You had some wonderful work, and it was tough to select the work that we did select because we had so many good pieces that came in. But thank you for participating in our third annual, and please be sure to take a look at the library's website for next year's Writers Read celebration. We usually start in November, send out notices that we're doing it and what the theme is, and we hope that you can participate again, and anybody in our audience who wants to participate is welcome. So again, thank you very much for joining us tonight, and we will keep celebrating, I guess. So enjoy.